Okay, let me start with what we know. With a sense of urgency, Russia asked the British government in the spring of 1915 to enter into negotiations over various concerns of the Allied powers in the Ottoman Empire. The Russians, seeking to secure their control over the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles Straits, were prompted to act after the British landing at the Gallipoli Peninsula. In response, the government in London decided to form a committee chaired by Sir Maurice de Bunsen to look into and define British interests in the Middle East. On 23rd of November 1915, negotiations between the British Mark Sykes and the French Georges-Picot started in London, with the aim of reaching a deal over the two powers' interests in the Ottoman Empire. An agreement was eventually drafted in January 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Until the conclusion of the negotiations between Mark Sykes and Georges-Picot in January, there is no record of any meaningful contacts between the Asquith government and the Zionist movement. Any contacts existed were made on personal, non-official basis. Although the agreement between Sykes and Picot met with the criticism in London, the British government decided to ratify the draft agreement on 16 of May 1916. First, because it didn't look politically tactful to ask for revisions when France was shouldering the heaviest burden of the war. And second, because of the failure of the Gallipoli campaign. It should also be remembered that by then, the British had not yet made any substantive progress, neither in their campaign in Iraq nor in the Sinai expedition. It was during the crucial period between the circulation of the draft Sykes-Picot Agreement and its ratification that the first British contacts with the Zionists were initiated. What prompted these contacts was the mentioning of the aspiration of Zionist Jews to settle in Palestine, included in the critical response to the Sykes-Picot Agreement written by Captain Reginald Hall, Chief of Naval Intelligence. That was in January 1916, before the ratification of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. A month later, Hugh O'Byrne, a senior official at the Foreign Office, distributed a minute summing up the Foreign Office views of the political advantages that the adoption of Zionist interests in Palestine could bring to the Allies' cause, especially in the United States. The United States had not yet entered into the war. Since the search had already started for ways to release Britain from her obligation to the French in the Middle East, even before the ratification of the agreement, Sir Mark Sykes moved to explore the Zionist option. From the British perspective, and this is what Professor Schleim just mentioned, the area south of the line extending from northern Iraq to the Mediterranean, or from the last E of Acre to the last K of Kirkuk, as Sykes once put it, should come under British control. While it was obvious that the agreement with the French did not fulfill such a vision, it was believed that bringing the Zionists to the table could supersede the French demands and secure southern area as a British area of influence. It claims by some historians that the British Zionist policy was motivated by biblical Protestant Zionist affinities are a bit far-fetched. The British approach to the Zionists was rather born out of cold, cynical, imperialist calculations. Neither Prime Minister Asquith, Foreign Secretary Edward Gay, nor the Catholic Mark Sykes was a Zionist. Of the two Jewish members of government at the time, Herbert Samuel and Edwin Montagu, only the first had Zionist connections. Samuel, January 1915 memorandum, which was mentioned by Abdullah and by Professor Sharim earlier, in which he invited the government to take the Jewish aspiration in Palestine into consideration, did not raise much interest. As noted by the late Mayor Vereter, the Asquith government took no action in Samuel's proposal. His memorandum was not circulated to the concerned department and was kept and can still be found in the cabinet papers. The Bunsen's June 19, that's a committee which had been formed to look into the British interest in the Middle East, presented its conclusion in 1915. Their report did not include any mention of Zionism or Zionist interests. It was upon Captain Holt's remark and opening minutes that Sykes took the initiative to make his first Zionist contacts. He met with Samuel and Dr. Moses Gaster in the spring of 1916 and later in the year with Aharon Aharonson. At the same time, during the months prior to the change of government in December 1915, both Sykes and officials at the Foreign Office were advancing various ideas for the accommodation of Zionist aspiration in Palestine. There were like ideas about American protectorate, a British protectorate, a kind of Middle Eastern Belgium, and so forth. Neither David Lloyd George, Asquith's successor in Downing Street, nor Arthur Balfour, who replaced Gray at the Foreign Office, undertook any major shift in policy in the Middle East. Above all, Sykes not only remained to serve the new government, but was also promoted to the cabinet secretariat. In its meeting of 31 October 1917, Lloyd George's government approved the text of the Foreign Secretary's declaration to the Zionists, which had already been subjected to several drafts. The 2nd of November 1917 declaration took the form of a letter from Balfour to Lord Walter Rothschild, the most eminent of the Jewish community in the UK, to be communicated to the Zionist Federation in Great Britain and Ireland. It read, I'm going to just read the first couple of lines of the 67 words of the declaration. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. The term national home is no doubt an ambiguous one. It certainly did not mean a state, and as James Calvin of California University has observed, it had no precedent in international law. Almost every single Zionist leader in the subsequent decades, together with the British officials who came to deal with the Palestinian question, was aware of the ambiguity of the term. A few years ago, during a research visit to the Public Record Office, I came across a highly interesting document, enclosing some early 1919 correspondence between Lord Balfour, the Foreign Secretary, and his fellow member of the cabinet, Lord President of the Council, Lord Curzon. It is perhaps worth noting that Lord Curzon was later in the year to succeed Balfour in the Foreign Office. He remained there, the Foreign Secretary, until the end of the coalition government in 1922. The first of Curzon's letters to Balfour, who was at the time in Paris for the peace conference, was written on 16 January 1919. After a meeting that Curzon held with Major General Arthur Wigram Money, a Limbis administrator of Jerusalem. Money had just finished his job in Jerusalem and came back to UK and asked to see Lord Curzon. In his letter, Curzon said that what he understood from Money is that, and I'm quote, a Jewish government in any form would mean an Arab rising, and the 9/10 of the population who are not Jews would make a short shrift with the Hebrews. End of quote. Indicating his agreement with Moni's assessment, Curzon added, as you know, I share these views and have for long felt that the pretensions of Wiseman and company are extravagant and out to be checked. Dr. Wiseman was at the time meeting all kinds of people in the corridors of the peace conference and talking about a Jewish state in Palestine. A few days later, on 20th of January, Balfour replied. His letter was brief but unequivocal, asserting the view that the British commitment to the Zionists did not entail the establishment of a Jewish state. He wrote, and I quote, as far as I know, Wiseman has never put forward a claim for the Jewish government of Palestine. Such a claim is, in my opinion, certainly inadmissible. And personally, I don't think we should go further than the original declaration which I made to Lord Rothschild. On 26th of January, Curzon wrote a second elaborate letter in which he explained to Balfour that, and I quote, while Wiseman may say one thing to you, and while you mean one thing by a national home, he is out for something quite different. With a growing sense of desperation over the Palestine policy, Curzon sent a third letter to Balfour on 25th of March 1919, in which he was commenting on the decision for by the Peace Conference to send an American commission of inquiry to the Arab Middle East. Later on, of course, the King Crane Commission went without an agreement, without the agreement of the British or the French. Curzon wrote, and I quote, the one thing I should personally like the Commission to do would be to extract us from the position in Palestine. I told you some time ago that Dr. Wiseman had departed altogether from the modest program upon which he agreed with you a year or more ago, and that the ambitions of the Zionists were exceeding all bounds. Curzon concluded his correspondence by expressing the hope that the American Commission would advise that the mandate in Palestine should be conferred upon anyone else rather than Great Britain. These, of course, were the opinions of two grandees of the British government during and after the war. While both served as foreign secretaries, Balfour was the one whose name would forever be attached to the infamous declaration to the Zionists. Yet both were unmistakably clear that the declaration was not about the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. There is no doubt that Balfour Declaration was the source of all evils in the Middle East. It does seem to me, however, that even that piece of evil was not meant to engender the amount of evil it came to bring about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.